What's up guys, Matt Day here, and today I'm going to be talking about documenting my recovery, both how and why I'm doing that, and I'm also going to share some of the photos I've made so far. But before we do all that, I want to take a second to pay some bills and thank our sponsor for the day, which is Squarespace. So if you need a website, a domain, or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace. It's a service I've been using for years, way before they ever sponsored my YouTube channel, but it's one I'm always recommending to people, so if you'd like to try it out, head over to squarespace.com/mattday and you can get 10% off your first purchase. So, documenting my recovery. This is something that I wanted to do pretty much right from the start after everything happened with the tick bite and being in the hospital. If you don't know anything about that as to what's been going on with me, you can check the card up at the top of the screen. There's a lot to go over there, but that should get you up to speed. But really, out of all of this, I wanted to make something positive out of everything that was going on and possibly just use this as a good exercise for my photography in general. I wanted to maybe take the situation and kind of see things in a different way and work in a different way than I'm used to with a camera, and quite literally actually with the nerve damage in my hand. I'm definitely working at a different speed and just in a different style from what I'm used to, as there are kind of some things I have to work around, but that was really kind of the idea of it. I wanted to take this situation that could easily, in a way defeat me, where I would just be down and not really, taking advantage of it, I guess, or at least using it as an opportunity to get something positive out of it. And that's really what I was trying to do. I use the term documenting my recovery in a way that I don't mean necessarily documenting the change, like, here's phase 1 and then there's phase 2 and you can like see the progression. But in a way, I just wanted to kind of share some insight, I guess, and try and see the things that really stand out to me, things that I'm going through, and trying to convey that in a photo. So it's definitely been a project and just a way of shooting that is very different from what I'm used to. If you've seen a lot of my work, a lot of it is very documentary style, especially the work that I share from my family. So this is a much more controlled, slow, methodical kind of approach to it that I normally don't really take. So just that alone is exciting for me, because I'm getting to, try things out in a different way and maybe learn some things in the process that could possibly influence my, my other everyday work, where I'm taking photos of my family and just kind of trying to, share that and what that's like for us. So with that in mind, the very first thing I thought about was the fact that at the time when I started this whole thing, I couldn't raise my camera to my eye. The camera that I use for pretty much everything is my Leica M6, and that really has to do with the way that I shoot, a lot with my family. It's very quick and candid, and that's, really the camera that works for me the most. It's been my everyday go-to camera for over 5 years now. And not being able to bring that up to my eye was really frustrating at first. I wanted to do something with this that I wouldn't normally be able to do. And at the same time, it's not really the camera that I was thinking about using for, I guess, some of the shots I had in mind. I wanted to be able to focus much closer and get really, really good, high quality detail out of that. And my first thought was something of medium format. So basically just trying to prioritize everything and, really focus on something like this, this project in general. I decided to sell some things that I wouldn't be using as much and things that just felt distracting to me. And those were 2 video game consoles. Anybody that knows me knows I love video games. I always have. But I really had this feeling that I needed to focus on something like this project. So I decided to sell my PlayStation 4 and all those games and controllers. I sold my Xbox One with the headset, all of my games, all of my controllers, all of that. Really to basically buy a camera that I thought would be, better useful to me. Something that would really get me the results I wanted, and just kind of put all my money in and focus on this project. Just because I felt like it was going to be good for me, not only to, make something out of all this, but to really focus on it, and it could be sort of therapeutic for me as I go through this recovery. So my first thought, again, thinking of something for medium format to get me, really good detail, be able to focus closer than my M6, and especially, since I can't bring my camera to my eye, I really wanted something with a waist level viewfinder. And my first thought was a Rolleiflex. I thought it's small, it's compact, it has a waist level viewfinder, and given the money that I had made from selling my game consoles, I found a Rolleiflex 3.5F that was going to be, or 3.5E actually, that was going to work for me. And I learned pretty much right away as I started using that was not going to work for me. The neuropathy, the pain in my hands, especially my fingertips, was really, really severe just those first few weeks out of the hospital. And it's gotten better since then. It's still pretty bad, but I knew that camera wasn't going to work like I'd hoped it would, because the knurling, all the metal grooves on every dial, the focus dial, aperture, shutter speed, it felt like I was just turning razor blades in my hands. It was really, really painful and kind of prevented me from shooting. I tried workarounds with like taping off certain things so it wouldn't be so aggressive, but I can't tape off the aperture and shutter speed dials, and those are particularly part of the worst aspect of that. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and was thinking, and a good friend of mine, Kyle Miles, he actually had this RZ67 setup that he was selling at the time, and coincidentally enough, he was looking for a Rolleiflex. So we ended up trading. I've had this camera several times over the years, not this particular one, but just the RZ67 in general. I've said for years it's one of my favorite cameras, but due to its size, it was never really it never really worked for me outside of using it on jobs where I was shooting portraits, and I really love this camera for portraits. It's just a fantastic setup all around, but because of that and how I normally shoot very quick and carrying my camera everywhere, this was never really the ideal setup for me. Oddly enough, now it's kind of perfect for me because it's very smooth to use, the knurling on everything, it hasn't bothered my hands at all. But being able to focus extremely close with the bellows, that kind of lended itself to some of the work that I was wanting to make. So I ended up, trading the camera straight off with him, and this thing has been great to work with. Not only the waist level viewfinder, but the weight of it was also kind of a concern, but luckily just putting it on the tripod, it works out for me. Even a monopod has helped out a lot because I can still use the waist level viewfinder, but just the camera itself, the weight being taken off of my shoulders and arms as I'm, recovering and getting my nerves and strength back. It's just been great. It's really worked out well for me. So I'm very, very happy to be using this camera. And oddly enough, just over the last week to 2 weeks, I've been able to get back to using my M6. It's very kind of hunched, and I'm using my ring finger to shoot with because my index finger is unfortunately one of the biggest issues that I've had with my right hand. I'm not very quick with the camera, but I can at least use it. But in terms of my recovery, I don't really use it for any of that. This has been the one camera I've used for the recovery in general. So there have been some things I've had to kind of jump around and work around, not only with the weight of the camera with the tripod and the monopod, but even just releasing the shutter. I've been shooting some self-portraits, which is very different for me. I'm not used to shooting stuff like that. But again, I'm taking this as an exercise to kind of get out of my comfort zone, shoot some things a little differently, and especially since this is about my recovery, which is a very physical thing, I figured it would make sense to include myself in these photos. So ways to work around that, I actually have a really long shutter release cable that has this bulb at the end of it, and whenever you squeeze this bulb, it will actually trip the shutter. And it's actually really useful, more than I would think. It works pretty easily. I've been using that to trip the camera even on the floor. The first self-portrait I shot, I just had my feet out of frame, and I've been able to just kind of step on that bulb, and then that will trip the shutter itself. So using things that way, that has worked to my advantage. Also, a buddy of mine, Vinny, he sent me this little self-timer that screws into the camera, and it has like a little wind-up dial on it. And that itself, if I want to shoot anything, full body where I don't want that cable release in the frame, that's also a great resource as well. And if I'm shooting the camera, not a self-portrait, I can just trip the shutter myself using my hand or a small cable release. But yeah, just a couple simple things like that to work around it. In terms of setting the focus, what I've usually done is had my wife stand in where I'm going to be, and then I set the focus on her, and then I immediately make her leave the room so I don't feel so awkward taking self-portraits with someone standing right there. But just simple little workarounds like that, having her stand in for me, using my foot to trip the shutter or the timer, that all has been extremely helpful, especially considering I'm a little limited in how I do this. but it really hasn't been that bad at all. We can go ahead and take a look at some of the photos here. So the very first photo I shot for this project, this is a photo of my tattoo on my left arm along with some tape over it. This tape is K-tape. It's this medical tape that's pretty common. We've been using it to kind of tape my shoulders back and kind of take some of the weight off, and that has been extremely helpful in terms of relief of pain, and probably just healing itself as well, just because my shoulders are seated properly. I'm not slouching or anything. Again, just due to the nerve issues, my shoulders were tending to do that, which was causing a lot of strain on my body. But basically, this tape, it's kind of goes all over my shoulders, but I noticed early on that the tape was kind of over one of my tattoos of this hourglass that says "Let's Live." This tattoo, I kind of have a few different, reasonings behind it. "Let's Live" was just sort of this phrase that was used by one of my favorite pro skateboarders that passed away years ago. It was sort of like a lifestyle, I guess you could consider it, something that he considered just as a way of kind of making the most of anything. Let's live, like let's really experience things, and just that kind of idea in general really applied to me, or it really kind of resonated with me, especially after growing up watching everything my brother went through. I really learned to not take things for granted, basically. So as soon as I first heard "Let's Live" in general, that really connected with me. And I thought now more than ever, seeing that kind of covered up by this tape that was kind of healing me, that was one of the things that really stood out to me at the very beginning of all this. So I wanted to get kind of a close-up of that. And not only that, but just a close-up of seeing how my body was even shaped at this time. I started noticing the shape of my shoulders, my chest, everything, my arms, really early on. After losing all of that weight and all that muscle, you start to see different shapes in yourself, So I tried to, play that into the composition as well. But it was just one of the very first things that stood out to me. So it was a good starting point for me, and kind of got the ball rolling. Especially considering how close I was focusing. I knew my depth of field was really, really narrow, and I wanted to make sure I nailed the focus. So I actually had my wife sit in for me, and then I stopped the lens down to, I think, 5.6. And you still see it's a really, really shallow depth of field. But it worked out for me. I definitely wanted to take that step into, making sure I got the focus, because I knew I was mailing all of this film out to the Fine Lab. I would love to normally develop all my own film like I always do, but right now with my right hand, I can't really maneuver the film onto the reels. I could do that with medium, or I could do that with 35 millimeter, just leave it, kind of lead it on there before I put it in the dark bag. But with medium format film, there's just no way I would be able to do that with my right hand. So I really wanted to make sure my focus was correct, because I knew it was going to be a couple of weeks before I, sent some film out, got some film back, and I didn't want to have to reshoot everything all over again a couple of weeks later. Another thing that really stood out to me was just looking down at my own hands and seeing how different they were when I tried to make a fist with my left hand, which turned out great, and then with my right hand, how far off it really was. And it was so weak, and just not really being able to, control that right hand like I'd like to. Looking down at my hands, right in front of me, it was really, really apparent. So I wanted to shoot two separate photos and kind of align them, showing the strong side and the weak side as well. So I basically just did this on our bed. I just put it on a white sheet and used the waist level viewfinder and had the camera angled down. So it was like I was looking straight into the camera, but it was reversed and upside down. But I was actually able to work around it pretty well. It was a great way for me to actually see my focus as I was shooting, as well as the composition as well. So that was super helpful. Another thing that really stood out to me right off the bat was how slow I've been moving due to this whole thing, especially in terms of just like daily routines with getting dressed, brushing my teeth, anything like that. I've just been working at a very slow pace. And it's getting better now. Now I can get dressed all by myself. But the first few weeks, my wife had to help me with my boxers, my socks, my pants, my shirt, everything. I wasn't able to maneuver any of that by myself. So I wore a lot of button-up shirts those first couple weeks because it was easier for me to get those on and off by myself. And just using the buttons on the front of my shirt, it was a really slow but good practice, I guess, kind of getting my right hand back into motion. So I shot this photo sitting on my bed as I was getting ready in the morning, and I really, really was happy with the light. That was kind of one of the first things that stood out to me. As I was sitting there getting ready, I noticed the light coming in through that window in our bedroom. It really stood out, so I wanted to try and kind of work with that and I was actually really happy with how this one turned out. And this actually is the photo I used, the long cable release, where I shot the photo with my foot, essentially. I basically focused where I was going to be sitting, stopped the lens down to maybe f4, and after that just ran this cable release down to where my feet would be sitting. That is my son knocking on our basement door trying to talk to me. Another photo I had in mind was something using my shadow, again just to kind of play off that shape as my body has changed so much, especially my shoulders, my upper arms. I really wanted to kind of include that and focus just on the shape rather than, you know, personally me. So that was how I kind of came up with the idea of using my shadow. So I shot this photo not only using the shadow of my body, but as the camera as well, because I felt like it helped better tell the story that it was me making these photos as I'm going through the recovery. I don't know if that's really that important or if that translates, but at least that's what I had in mind. So those are just a few of the photos I've made so far for my recovery. I'm not going to share everything here, and honestly right now I'm not sure exactly where to go in the next step. My recovery is something that's very slow. It's not necessarily things where I'm going to see changes every day, so this is going to be sort of a slow and long project. And I really don't know exactly what I'm going to do with it. I might just share them here and on Instagram. I might make a zine. I'm not really sure exactly how I want to do this, but really right now I'm not trying to think about that, I guess. I'm mostly just trying to focus on the idea of using the camera, taking everything as it comes rather than trying to plan things out too much, because I don't know exactly, you know, when there's going to be a big change in the recovery. I don't know how that's going to, you know, physically and visually translate. So right now I'm not really shooting much. I haven't shot a photo for this project in about a week, but that's okay. Again, I'm trying to do this differently than I normally would, not put too much pressure on it and just kind of let things happen organically. So I hope you guys enjoyed seeing those photos and kind of hearing about the process. If you'd like to see more stuff like this as I shoot the photos, I'd love to kind of continue this into a series where I update you guys with new photos, how everything's going, if anything changes, anything like that. So if you'd like to see this kind of continued on the channel, definitely let me know in the comments. So I really appreciate all the support, especially on the last video. I cannot thank you guys enough for all the kind words and stuff that you left in the comments there. I have read every single comment. It really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for that. So again, let me know if you'd like to see more of this in the future or if you have any other suggestions, and I will see you guys in the next video.